Al-Meshieltebur. The Volga Bulgar ruler converts to Islam and struggles to assert the independence from the Khazar Empire that ruled over them for 3 centuries, and to unite the Bulgar tribes. Perhaps in part to do so more effectively, he strengthens his relation with the mighty Abbasid Caliphate by sending his ambassadors to seek proper instruction in Islam, asking to send builders to erect a proper mosque and also requesting that a fortress be built for defense against the kings who were his adversaries. And thus, the Caliph gave a favorable answer by sending an envoy named Sawsan al-Rasi, who was accompanied by 4 assistants, one of them being the jurist Ahmed ibn Fadlan. Ahmed ibn Fadlan writes in his journal about the task that was given to him. He said, "I was given the responsibility for reading the letter to the king, making over to him the gifts that had been sent him, and supervising the teachers and jurists." This would be the beginning of Ibn Fadlan's famous travel to the north, where he made a detailed account of different tribes that he met on his way. Baghdad, Friday 21 June, the year 921. The envoys of Caliph Muqtadir set out from what Ibn Fadlan calls the City of Peace and embark on a journey that will take them 11 months before reaching the eastern bank of the Volga River in what is now Russia. After 1 month of marching through the barren rugged mountains and salty desert of Persia, the envoy entered the capital of the Samanid Empire, Bukhara, and went to the secretary of the Emir of Khorasan, Jahani. Jahani provided for them a house and sent them a man to attend their needs. After their stay of 28 days, they decided to set out to their next stop, Khawarizm. They didn't want to stay any longer in Bukhara knowing winter was coming, and they would not be able to travel. Jahani ordered an escort for them, and asked him not to put any difficulties in their path. After they left Bukhara, they head back to the river and hired a boat to take them to Khawarizm. It was impossible for them to travel all day, because of the intense cold, so they traveled only part of each day, which lasted until they reached Khawarizm. The envoys then went at once to the ruler of the town, the Khawarizm Shah, Muhammad ibn Iraq. He showed them honor, admitted them to his presence, and lodged them in a house. After 3 days he summoned them to discuss the question of visiting the land of the Turks. Initially he didn't give them the permission to go, knowing the dangers of the journey ahead of them, but after they showed him the orders of the commander of the faithful in his letter, he finally allowed the envoy to continue the mission. In Khawarizm, Ahmed ibn Fadlan describes his first account of customs and lives of a people. He writes about the Khawarizmians, which are the present-day Uzbeks and Turkmens, and says, "The Khawarizmians are the most barbarous of people, both in speech and customs. Their language sounds like the cries of starlings. In their country there is a village 1 day's journey away called Ardakua, whose inhabitants are known as Kardalia, and their speech sounds exactly like the croaking of frogs. They deny the legitimacy of the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, may God be content with him, at the end of each prayer." On their way to the Turkic lands, the envoys met some local people with whom they were on friendly terms. The locals urged them to be prudent as regards clothing and to take large quantities. Each of them was wearing a tunic, and over that a kaftan. On top of that a cloak of sheepskin, and over that again a felt outer garment, with a head covering that left only the 2 eyes visible. Each of them wore a plain of pair of trousers and another padded pair, socks, horse-hide boots, and over those boots other boots, so that when any one of them mounted a camel, he could hardly move because of all the clothes he was wearing. While marching on across this flat desert-like steppe, they never turned aside from the road or met a soul. They journeyed for 10 days, suffering from endless difficulties, from exhaustion, intense cold, and the constantly falling snow, until they reached a place where there were great quantities of tagwood. They stopped there and the caravan lit a fire. They warmed up and stripped off their clothes to dry them. They continued on their way each night from midnight until afternoon or midday, moving as fast as they could and over the longest stages possible. Then they would halt. After having marched like this for 50 nights, they reached a great mountain, very rocky, through which streams fought their way, filling depressions with water and forming pools. After they had crossed the mountain, Ibn Fadlan writes, "We came to a tribe of Turks called Ugus. They were nomads who live in felt tents and come and go. You see their tents first in one place, then in another, as is the way of the nomads depending on their movements. They live in poverty like wandering ashes. They do not worship God, nor do they have resource to reason. They do not worship anything but call their great men lords. When one of them asks his leader's advice on something, he says, 'Lord, what should I do about this or that matter?' Their political regime is based on consultation amongst themselves. Nevertheless, when they have agreed on something and have decided to do it, the basest and most wretched of them can come and break the agreement. I have heard them say, 'There is no God but God. Muhammad is the messenger of God,' to make a good impression on the Muslims who stay with them, but they do not believe in this firmly. If one of them suffers an injustice or something bad happens to him, he lifts his head to heaven and says, 'Bir Tinjri,' which means 'by the one God' in the language of the Turks, for Bir in Turkish means one and Tinjri is God. They do not wash after polluting themselves with excrement and urine. They do not wash after major ritual pollution or any other pollution. They have no contact with water, especially in winter. Their women do not veil themselves before their own men or strangers. Similarly, the women do not hide any part of their body. One day, we went to the home of one of them and sat down. This man's wife was with us. As we were talking, she bared her private parts and scratched while we stared at her. We covered our faces with our hands and each said, 'I seek forgiveness from God.' Her husband began to laugh and addressing the interpreter and said, 'Tell them this. She uncovers her private parts in your presence and you see them, but she protects them and allows no one near, better than covering them up and letting you get at them.' Ibn Fadlan also said about them, 'All Turks pluck their beards, but not their mustaches. I once saw a very aged man who had pulled out his beard, but left a tuft under his chin. He was wearing a kind of goatskin cloak, so that from a distance he looked exactly like a billy goat.' After leaving the region of these Turks, the envoy stopped at the camp of the commander of their troops, who is called Atrak, the son of Katagan. He had round Turkish tents pitched and settled the envoys in them. He had followers, servants, and numerous yurts. He had sheep bought for them and also horses. The sheep were to slaughter, the horses to ride. He invited a large number of his family and cousins and slaughtered many sheep for them. The envoy had sent him a present of clothing, raisins, walnuts, pepper, and millet. Ibn Fadlan also said about the commander, 'I saw his wife who had been the wife of his father. She took meat, yogurt, and some of the things we had brought as presents, went away from the tents into the desert, dug a hole, and buried what she had with her. And she spoke certain words. I asked the interpreter what she was saying. He answered, 'She says, it's a gift for Katagan, the father of Atrak, which the Arabs offer him.' When the envoy left the Oghuz tribe, they rode until they came to the river Yaghindi, where they folded out boats made out of camel skin. They crossed the river, and then they crossed the rivers Yakhsh, the Udil, the Ardin, the Warsh, the Akhtil, and the Wabna, which are all great rivers. At last they reached the Bayanak Turks. The Bayanaks were encamped at the edge of a body of water resembling a sea, for it was not flowing. Ibn Fadlan writes about them, 'Their skins were dark brown, their chins shaved, and they were poor compared to the Oghuz. In fact, among the Oghuz, I have seen people who possess 10,000 horses and 100,000 head of sheep. The sheep mostly graze on what lies under the snow, which they scrape aside with their hooves in order to get to the grass. When they cannot find any, they nibble snow and become very fat. When summer comes, they eat grass and grow thin. We stayed one day with the Bayanak.' After meeting this tribe, the envoy set out again and crossed several rivers before reaching the Bashgirts. About the Bashgirts, Ibn Fadlan writes, 'We took every possible precaution against them, for they are the worst of Turks, the dirtiest and the readiest to kill. When one of them meets another, he cuts off his head and carries it off with him, leaving the body. They shave their beards and eat lice. A man will pursue one through the seams of his coat and crack it with his teeth. We had with us a man of this people who had converted to Islam and who served us. One day, I saw him take a flea from his clothes, and after having crushed it with his fingernail, he devoured it and on noticing me said, "Delicious." Each of them carves a piece of wood shaped like a phallus and attaches it about his person. When he wants to start out on a journey, or when he meets an enemy, he kisses it and bows before it and says, "Lord, do this or that for me." I said to the interpreter, "Ask one of them to explain their behavior and why they consider such a thing to be their Lord." He answered, "Because I came from such a thing and cannot imagine anything else to be my creator." We saw a clan that worships snakes and another that worships fish, and another that worships cranes. These told me that one day, while they were fighting some of their enemies and were on the point of being defeated, the cranes began to give their call behind their opponents. Their enemy was frightened and turned and fled. This is why they worship cranes. They say, "They are our Lord because they scattered our enemies, and they worship them for that reason." The Bashgirts were the last tribe that they met before they reached the Bulgar king. From there the journey would take them only 1 day and 1 night. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to click that like button. Also don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to be notified about our latest videos.